All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Seal Island. My name is Keenan Yakola, and I am the Seal Island supervisor. Um, I oversee all the research that is done out here on this island, and I am in charge of 4 other research interns that are working out here with me. Um, Seal Island is about 65 acres, and we're about 22 miles offshore from Rockland in mid-coast Maine. The island itself is about a mile long, and we have several different seabird species that are nesting here. You might see a few terns and guillemots behind me, mixing it up here. Um, but we're going to jump right into your questions here, and I really want to focus on what we do as researchers out here and what Project Puffin does to help these seabirds. So the first question that we have here is, what do researchers wear to protect themselves while banding a chick? Also, is time of the essence so birds do not get freaked out and abandon a burrow? Keep up your good work. Alright, so the puffin chicks, even though they look like they have a scary beak, they really don't have too strong of a bite yet. They haven't built up those muscles yet that they really get when they're fishing and when they're adults. So we really don't have to worry about the bites of puffin chicks. So we can just use bare hands, and it's not too much of a concern for us. And the birds themselves, they'll get a little freaked out when we go into burrows, but they certainly don't abandon a burrow. We minimize the time as much as we can when we're inside a burrow and when we're handling the birds. We really want to get them out of a burrow and get them back in. And we really don't handle chicks that often here. The only time that we handle the chicks is to put the bird banding laboratory bands on the birds. All right. We have a second question here, and it says, what is a typical day like on Seal Island? So on Seal Island, we start our days usually around 5:30. We get up, and one of us does what we call a morning bird count. And we have a specific spot that we've been counting birds every single morning at 6 a.m. for the past 20 years. That starts at 6 a.m. and that usually takes about 20 minutes or so. And we're counting specific species. We focus on puffins, razorbills, the guillemots, and some of the gull species as well. Once we do that, we move into doing what we call morning weather, and we have a weather station here, and we take data on the weather 3 times a day, and we do that in the morning, around midday, and in the evening. And we also take sea surface temperature, so we have to walk down the island a little bit, and we toss the bucket off one of the cliffs, and we reel it up, and we take the temperature of the water. And we do this to monitor the local weather conditions on the island and to see how the weather conditions are affecting both the productivity of the birds and maybe their success of foraging. Once we finish our morning duties like that, we usually move out to the blinds between 7 and 8 o'clock, and we spend about 3 hours in a blind stint. Once we get back from blind stint, we have lunch, a little bit of a lunch break, and then we usually head out to do a type of productivity where we check on the tern chicks or the puffin chicks, and then we move into another blind stint until the evening, and then we'll come back and have dinner and hang out a bit before we go to bed, and we'll catch up on data as well. So the next question here is, where do you sleep? We actually all camp the whole summer out here. We each have our own tent, and we have a main little cabin that's about 12 by 12, which we do all of our cooking in, and we have a little table that we eat at. And we also do all of our data entry and storage of specific research items. We keep that in the cabin as well. But pretty much the whole summer, you're sleeping in your tent. When I first arrived here in May, it was very cold and very windy, but now it's quite pleasant and it's not too cold at night. With your time on Seal Island winding down, the research team must be looking to small luxuries like hot showers. Can you share this season's nesting productivity numbers? We're certainly looking forward to getting back to the mainland and having some hot showers. We've been swimming in very cold ocean water. It's still about 50 degrees when we go swimming and take baths in the ocean, so we'll definitely be looking forward to that. And the other thing that we're really looking forward to is cold food. We have one refrigerator here, but it doesn't always work that well, and it runs on propane. So we're looking forward to things like ice and ice cream, which are very simple things to people living on the mainland, but they're very special to us. So we're looking forward to that when we get back home. Um, the next question here is, can you share this season's nesting productivity numbers? We haven't calculated everything yet. The puffins are actually still nesting, and we still have puffins hatching, so we can't calculate productivity quite yet. The terns this year, however, they've pretty much finished up, and some of them have already started heading south again. And they had a very good year, and we think that they had about 1.3 chicks per pair, which is a fantastic number out here. And we're really happy about that, and we think that's because they've had great food this season for the terns, and we're hoping that the puffins will see similar numbers. And we can definitely share those with you once we finish out the calculations. Based on the 2014 report, the eggs at Egg Rock were fed up to 26 times per day, while on Seal Island, 5 to 8 feedings per burrow were typical. The Egg Rock fish must be considerably smaller, and it says, 1, is this because it is more sheltered location, and 2, the fish source must be very close for the parents to be able to make so many trips. How close? So we have a lot of questions here, and the first thing that we have to acknowledge is that Egg Rock is very different than here. They're only about 8 miles offshore, and it's much closer to the mainland. We don't know exactly where all of our puffins are feeding. It's very difficult to figure this out, but we think that they're flying several miles, if not up to 20 miles away to get food, even on Egg Rock and even on Seal Island. But some days on Seal Island, we do see the puffins feeding very close. It's very difficult for us to figure out where the puffins are fishing and how it differs between islands. So it's hard to say, but we're doing the same study that they did on Egg Rock last year, and we're seeing about 5 to 8 feedings per burrow as well this year. Very similar numbers, and this isn't too much of a surprise. We have seen puffins feeding very close to the island, maybe about a quarter of a mile off the island or a half mile. But we do know sometimes they're going very far, and fishermen have told me, and other tour leaders of some birding boats have told me that they've seen puffins about 15 miles north of here. That very well could be from here. So they could be going very far. The next question, this is a good one. What is your favorite part about working on the island? I think that my favorite part about being on Seal Island is that it's such a large island, and you're always with birds, and it's very rare to find somewhere in this day and age where another species dominates the landscape instead of humans. So here there's thousands of seabirds that are nesting, and there's usually only 5 people. And that's really incredible. And every night when I go to bed, I hear birds, and every morning when I get up, I hear birds. I often hear puffins and terns and guillemots, and at night I hear leeches, storm petrels flying around my tent. So there's always birds, and the scenery is stunning, and that is my favorite part about working on the island, I think. It's a beautiful place, and it never gets old. The next question here is, I'm assuming that a puffin chick's legs are not fully grown. So does the band expand, or is it large enough to accommodate a growing chick? So this question's a good one, because we're putting on the bands onto Joy today, which is very exciting news. We usually wait for about the puffin chick to be about 3 weeks old before we put the bands on. And this is because when they're younger, their legs aren't quite big enough to support the band, and it'll slip right over the ankle joint. So we have to wait till they get old enough. And when they're 3 weeks old, we know that the band isn't going to fall off and slip over that ankle joint. And that's typically when we know it's okay to band them. So its leg will still grow a little bit, and we know it can handle it. The band itself won't expand at all, but it is certainly large enough to accommodate the growing chick. So this isn't too much of an issue, and we think that Joy is certainly old enough to take this band. So hopefully all of you will get to see some pictures that we'll take of her with her new little rings on her feet. The next question is, were any puffins outfitted with the GPS bands this year? This year we haven't put out any GPS bands on the puffins, but we have been capturing some adults that have these GPS bands on them. Um, we can't download the data out here. They have to go back to the mainland, so we don't know any of the data from the puffins that we've captured. But we definitely think that it'll be interesting and really useful data. We'll be able to know where the puffins migrate to every winter, and we also will get some data on where they're feeding to get fish for their chicks, which is something that we don't know too much about. So it's very exciting, and we're looking forward to getting this data. When and how do you decide to intervene with predators? So this is a tough question to answer. We don't like dealing with predators too much, but one of the best things about us being out here is that many of the predators that are problems, such as bald eagles or peregrine falcons that would take puffins or terns, they're actually afraid of us. So just us being out here makes a huge difference to scare away predators. Sometimes you'll see a bald eagle fly over, or a peregrine falcon when you're out in the tern colony and the puffin colony. And the best thing you can do is to make sure that that bird sees you. And when you make yourself known, if you wave your arms or they see you, then they're more often than not going to leave and they won't bother the birds. So this is the best way to deal with them out here. Luckily, a lot of those predators we don't see too often because we're quite far offshore, but that's how we deal with them when we see them. We have another question here, and it's, I've been reading about the failure and decline of puffin colonies in the Scandinavian countries, which still have hundreds of thousands of puffins. Yet here in Maine, our puffin colonies look like they are thriving based on what I see on Seal Island. Do you know much about what is going on in Scandinavia? Well, I know that farther north there are tons of puffins. Most of the population is farther north than Maine, and they have millions of puffins. But the big problem up there is that they're seeing a lot of overfishing, and the fisheries are declining very heavily. And I think that's why their populations are declining, because they can't get enough food to raise their chicks. On Seal Island, it's a bit different because the island isn't as big and it can't handle as many puffin pairs. So that the colony is much smaller than something that you would see up in Scandinavia or just farther north, up in Iceland or in Canada. So it's very different, and it's difficult to compare because we're harboring a much smaller colony and they don't need as much food as those large ones, and the food isn't being spread out as much. So that's my theory about the fish here. If we had a larger colony, then perhaps there wouldn't be enough fish in the nearby ocean to raise all those puffin chicks. What kinds of info will be gathered about Joy when she gets banded? Is our next question. So later today, when we take Joy out of her burrow, the first thing that we'll do is we'll put her right in a little bag, and we'll use a scale to take her weight. We put her in the bag so that we can put the scale onto the bag and we can take her weight. And we also put her in here so she doesn't get as stressed out. And then once we take her weight, we'll just take her wing out, and we'll take a wing cord so we know how big her wing is. And we'll also take a ratio to figure out what the percentage of down that is left on her body is compared to the feathers that are growing in instead of the down. And once we finish that and we get that data, we'll then put some bands on her. We'll put the bird banding laboratory band on first, which always has to go on a bird when you're working with them scientifically. And after we do that, we'll then put on a field readable band, which will have the 4 alphanumeric combo that will be, I believe it'll be around FG02 or FG03, something like that. And that will be repeated 3 times around the band. And I think that you'll be able to see that once we put Joy in her burrow, and we'll take some photos of the bands themselves so you can see what they look like. The next question is, someone said, surprised to hear puffins are still hatching now. That puts fledging at mid-September. Will those parents still remain on the island long enough for these chicks to survive? Yes, puffins are still hatching now. It's very surprising. Puffins, for some reason, laid very late this year. We still had puffins laying eggs in the beginning and middle of June. And we still even have parents that are incubating their eggs So that's exactly right. We'll still see puffins that may be fledging in mid-September. This is very unusual. We don't see this every year. Um, but the parents should stay here and feed the chicks, and they'll probably leave at the end of September. Um, I'll be here actually until September 15th, and I'll be following some of those puffins that still have eggs, and we'll be hatching chicks soon. Um, so I'll be able to give you guys an update while I'm out here. I'm going to be out here a little longer than usual this season, and still going to be working with the puffins and banding the puffins and looking at their diet, um, and also going to be keeping away predators while I'm out here just by being here. The next question is, do puffins migrate together or do they return to the island from separate locations? From what we know from literature and from research that other scientists have done, puffins do not form big flocks and they don't migrate during the winter. They don't migrate together during the winter. They usually will be alone at sea, but occasionally they'll join a flock of razorbills or some other alcids, like murres or something like that, and they stay very far out to sea. So most of those puffins are actually returning at different times and not together from separate locations in the spring to when they come back to Seal Island. Another question we have is, when the puffin chick fledges, will Phoebe and Finn stay behind to guard the burrow, or will they escort Joy to the water? So when Joy fledges, she'll head out on her own, and she may never see Phoebe or Finn again, and she'll be all by herself, and she'll know exactly when to fish and eat all by herself. It's pretty amazing. And usually the Finn and Phoebe will stay behind for a little bit and guard the burrow. This time of year is when a lot of young puffins are coming, and they're getting ready for their first breeding next year, and maybe they're checking out burrows and trying to find a good spot to raise a chick of their own next year. So they should stay behind a little bit, and they'll usually hang around the entrance, and they won't let other puffins in, and if one goes in, they might chase it out, because they need to make sure that they have that burrow next year. They're a very successful pair, and we hope that they return next year and we can follow them again. So they'll have to guard their burrow for at least a little bit. The next one is a little bit tricky, but I'll do my best to answer it. It is, what is it that makes these fledgling puffins capable of heading out on the ocean without prior teaching from their parents? This is a very tricky question. I don't know exactly how these fledglings know, and I don't know if anybody knows. But one thing we do know is that the feeding rate from parents will actually decline when the chicks get old enough. They won't be fed as much, and the chicks might get hungry, and that might convince them to leave the burrow and go look for food on their own. So that's the best answer that I have, is that the parents will start leaving the chick alone a little bit more, and they won't bring it fish as often. So the chick will be forced to go out to look for its own fish and survive on its own. Another question we have here is, do the guillemot chicks stay with their parents after fledging, or are they on their own like the puffin fledglings? And the guillemot chicks are exactly the same. Our guillemot chick that is on the burrow cam now, within a couple weeks, that chick will go off to sea completely alone. It'll know how to fish, and it won't stay with their parent too long at all. The only exception to alcids that we have on this island is the razorbill. And we have about 40 pairs of nesting razorbills this year on Seal Island. And when the razorbill chicks fledge very quickly compared to puffins. They only take about 3 weeks and sometimes sooner. And those chicks will head out to sea and actually stay with their father, and the father will help them feed, and it'll teach them. It's very different than the puffins or the guillemots. So that's kind of an interesting little bit of information that we have here about our breeding seabirds. The next question we have is, are there storm petrels nesting near the guillemot burrow? There's actually storm petrels nesting all over this island. They like to make little burrows into the sod. They don't nest under rocks, and they don't make nests like puffins or guillemots or terns. They actually dig their own burrow with their feet and with their bill a little bit, and they'll get right into the sod, and some of them can be very deep into the soil. So I know that there's a few storm petrel burrows near the guillemot burrow. There's even some near the puffin burrow, and the grasses nearby. And there's even some around our tents. They're all over near our tents in the hillside. So we hear them quite frequently, and if you log on to the puffin burrow cam in the evening or on the guillemot burrow cam, you might actually be able to hear them. I've heard from other people that occasionally, if you listening to the cam around between 10 p.m. and 2 p.m. Eastern time, or 2 a.m., sorry about that, then you might be able to hear these Leach's storm petrels. You can only hear them at night. They're not around during the day. They go very far out to sea at night, or during the day to feed, and they come back only at night, and that's when we hear them. Was the decision not to put out puffin decoys this year an indicator that the local puffin population is stable, or do you just switch off between the razorbill and puffin decoys? So actually, we don't even need to use decoys anymore. The puffin population here is doing quite well, and it's still increasing. And just the other puffins that are nesting here themselves are the most perfect decoy that we could ever ask for. They're just real-life puffins, and we have a lot of them hanging out on the rocks. And just them being there will attract more and more puffins. So we don't usually worry about the decoys too much. However, we do put decoys up near the cameras because we want to attract them so you guys can see them, and sometimes that makes them a little more comfortable around the camera or nearby. This year, actually, we lost a couple of our puffin decoys, and they weren't replaced out here, so we actually didn't have any puffin decoys that we could put up. So we only put up the razorbill decoy this year because that's what we had out here on the island. And there seems to be a lot of razorbills and even murres on the loafing ledge this year, so perhaps it's working to attract them there. If one of the fledgling puffins returns to the island, will they try to find their birth burrow? I don't think that anybody knows too much about this, but I would suspect that they wouldn't. They come back to the island and they might hang around near the burrow that they hatched out of, but this could just be a coincidence, or they might just like the habitat nearby because that's where they were raised. But it's difficult to say. I think in most cases, if one of the pufflings returned to their parents' burrow, then they would be treated as just another puffin and as an intruder, and then they would scare it away. So I think that's what happens when the puffins return, and they have to find their very own burrow with nobody in it. Why do the puffin parents compost the burrow after the chick fledges? Well, this is a good question. The reason they do this is because you want to make sure that there's no bacteria growing that could harm a chick in the future, and you want it to be clean after they leave. So that way in the future the puffin can have a nice clean burrow and they don't have to worry about a lot of guano that was left behind by their previous chick. We have another question here, and how many families currently have burrows on the burn? Will any other pufflings be fledging at the same time as Joy? There are a lot of burrows near Joy. Sometimes you might hear them on the cam, and they might be doing their chainsaw call back and forth from burrow to burrow. Especially, I've noticed they're quite vocal in the evening, and recently many of the chicks have been vocal in the evening as well. So you might actually be able to hear some other chicks that aren't just Joy in a nearby burrow. There's several chicks around very close, probably within just a few meters of Joy. And I would estimate there's probably around 100, or maybe a little less than 100, in that one berm that we can see from the Boulder Berm camera. So there's many chicks there, and there's several chicks that are about the same age as Joy. We've noticed that the chicks here tend to hatch in waves, so you have one area where the puffins have laid, one area meaning like the Boulder Berm area. A lot of those puffins might lay around the same time, and we're not really sure why this happens, but we've noticed this happening, and then maybe puffins near the loafing ledge cam might hatch at a slightly different day, and they might fledge at a slightly different time. But usually in the surrounding areas, the puffins will fledge around the same time. All right, I think we're back up again. We had a little bit of a technical difficulty. We're going to go back to question 21 here that I had, which is, have you seen any mammals on Seal Island? In Steve Kress's book, he writes about dealing with a marten, or maybe it was an otter, that was killing chicks in the puffin colony one year. So we're so remote out here that we'd never see mammals. It would be extremely rare for an otter or a mink to swim out here and harass the colony. We're about 22 miles away from Rockland, so we're very far out to sea compared to eastern Egg Rock, which is only about 6 miles from the closest mainland. And there's a few islands that mammals could skip along to get out to Egg Rock. So that's much more of a concern when you're closer to land, but since we're so remote, we never have to deal with mammals. The only mammals that we ever see here are us humans, and we see gray seals and harbor seals and that are around the island occasionally, and they pup here in the winter time, and they have their babies here. But we don't see them too often in the summer, and they're not too much of a concern for the puffins. They don't harm them in any way. So mammals are not a concern at all out here on Seal Island. Next question is, have Phoebe and Finn ever had 2 chicks? They definitely have not. Puffins always lay 1 egg. It would be an extremely rare case if they were to lay 2 eggs. So puffins always raise just 1 chick. That's the most that they can handle. It's very difficult to raise a puffin chicks, and the puffins are always working very hard just to raise this 1 chick. So it'll always just be 1 chick that we'll see in the puffin burrow. Our next question is, twice we have seen the parents drag pieces of wood or cardboard into the burrow. One had been a partial sign, and they were asking if any ideas where this might be or where it came from. There's a lot of debris that is on the island, and it's possible that a puffin might mistake a piece of debris, such as cardboard or a piece of plastic, for a nice stick to line their burrow or a nice piece of grass, and maybe that's why they brought it in. That would be my best guess, is that the puffins are just trying to add to their burrow and bring in grass, and maybe they made a mistake and brought in a piece of trash. We do see a lot of trash out here, which is not fun to see, and we don't like to see it, and we especially don't like to see it in the puffin burrows. But this year we did a big trash cleanup, and hopefully all that trash will be heading off the island pretty soon and won't be out here anymore. But every year and every day, more and more trash washes up, so make sure that you get your recyclables in and you keep a good eye on your trash, because we don't want it out here, and it's happening other places, other seabird islands as well. They're seeing plastic and other debris washing up on their shores and ending up in the diet of seabirds. So keep a good eye on your trash to help the birds. The next question is, I'm a student in animal behavior, and I did my field notes on puffins. What kind of education and experience did you have to work on Seal Island? So I first started working with birds in my senior year of high school. I did an internship at Wellfleet Bay Audubon Sanctuary at Cape Cod, and I started learning about birds, and I really liked it. So during that summer I had a chance to work with the National Park Service on Cape Cod and work with piping plovers, and I did that for another summer. And then I did a little work with some least terns that are down on Cape Cod as well. And then once I had that experience, I was also able to work here for Project Puffin. And last year I was on Eastern Egg Rock, and now I've moved up here to Seal Island as the research supervisor here. My other training was at UMass Amherst, where I studied natural resource conservation. And I learned a lot about birds there, and I've also worked with birds in Peru. I did a job in Peru, a volunteer job, banding some passerine birds, which are little songbirds down in Peru. And I did a lot of work, extra work in college, because I was obsessed with birds and I wanted to do the best that I could do. And that's what I did, and a lot of personal observation of birds, and I love bird watching. And I think that's the best you can do. If you want to be a field biologist, you need to study hard and be book smart, but you also need to get out and watch the birds and experience what they're doing and understand their behaviors. And if you're a good observer, then it's a good chance that you can be a good field biologist and have an opportunity to work on a project such as Project Puffin, or for any other field position working with any animal. You need to be a good observer, and you also need to be book smart. That's the best advice that I can give. So the next question is, I'd like to know what Keenan does when he's not interning on Seal Island with our beloved puffins. So as I was just saying, I just graduated college. I did my undergrad at UMass Amherst. There's a chance that I'll be heading back there this winter to do my master's, actually working with Arctic terns, common terns, and roseate terns. And I'd still be working out here on Seal Island doing some research on them. So I think that's what I'll be doing, and if that doesn't work out, then I'll be working with birds elsewhere. I'm not really sure where it'll be yet, but I love traveling, and I love traveling the world to see birds and work with birds. So I think that's what I'll be doing when I'm not here, and I love being outside, so I'll do my best to figure that out when the time comes. But I still have about a month left out here, a little more than a month on Seal Island, so I'll enjoy every second of it. Our next question here is, do Finn and Phoebe stay together for migration and the non-nesting season? And Finn and Phoebe do not stay together. Most puffin pairs will split up for the winter, and they will not stay together. They'll go to completely different wintering areas. They shouldn't be near each other. They might accidentally come in contact for some strange coincidence, but usually the first time that they'll see each other after winter is here on Seal Island. That's where they'll reform their pair bond and get ready for another nesting season. The next question here is, might pufflings that fledge at the same time hang out together at sea? Or are their puffins pretty solitary when it's non-breeding season? Puffins are very solitary, and I think that we're still learning about their non-breeding season, but we do know that they are solitary. I think it could be a little different for younger birds. Occasionally you'll see small groups of younger birds hanging out together. I know that Steve Crest told me when he was coming out here to spend a few days with myself and the rest of the field crew, he saw a group of some young puffins that are about 2 or 3 years old, and they were all in a big group. So not too many of them though, but there is a chance that the younger birds may hang out together for a little bit, but during the non-breeding season they are quite solitary. Our next question is, when the chicks fledge, do they just waddle down to the water, jump in, and swim off, or do they try to fly from the shore? They can do either one. I think it depends on the location of their burrows. For example, if you go farther north, where on other puffin breeding colonies, they have very high cliffs that they actually need to fly off of. But here, there's a good chance that they usually just waddle down to the ocean. The Finn and Phoebe's burrow is very close to the water. They don't have to walk very far at all. It's only about 15 or 20 yards, maybe even less. So Jory will most likely waddle right down to the water and hop right in, but she might fly a little bit just to jump in. Our next question here is, should something happen to one of the pair of parents after the chick hatches, would a single parent be able to successfully raise a chick on their own? And I don't know if there's any known occurrences of this happening. It's very difficult to track a single burrow, and we're very lucky to have the camera here because we're getting a very interesting scientific look at a single puffin burrow. But my guess is that a single puffin may be able to raise a chick. It would be very difficult, but they may be able to do it in a year of extremely abundant food resources. But if there isn't enough food and the puffin has to travel far to get the food, then it is very unlikely that one puffin could raise a single chick. They need their mate in order to bring up that chick. So I want to tell you guys a little bit about the other birds that are nesting here. Seal Island is a magical place full of several different species of birds, and we don't just work with the puffins. We work a lot with other species. We put a lot of effort into monitoring the tern species. We have both Arctic and common terns. We have over 2,000 breeding pairs of terns on this island. And some of the studies that we conduct on the terns include banding and monitoring banded birds when they come back to breed. We have some terns here that are over 20 years old that have been nesting here for many, many years. And we see them every year by reading their bands with spotting scopes from bird blinds. We also do some work with black guillemots, which you might see on the cams or that you might see in the pond behind me. So we do what we call productivity checks, where we have a certain number of burrows and we always check the same burrows every 4 to 5 days, and we get to see when those eggs are hatched, and then we get to watch those chicks as they grow up. And we do that with the guillemots, and we also do that with the puffins. We also do a little bit of work here with herring gulls and blackback gulls and common eiders. Every year we do an island-wide census to try to figure out how many pairs of blackback gulls, herring gulls, and common eiders are nesting here. And we also occasionally will get a boat ride down to the far end of the island, which is about a mile long, to count the cormorants. We have both double-crested and great cormorants nesting here on Seal Island.